guys, welcome to the 263 Political Café, and I am your host, Tariro Gurure. This show seeks to interrogate the way we are participating as young people and young women in politics come 2023. And of course, today I have an amazing young woman. Her name is Namatai Kwekweza. She's a force to reckon with, but you need to know that she is so interested in law with the way that she's been pushing a lot of low-hanging fruits, the SIs, the PVO bills, and the amendment bill number 2. Welcome, Namatai.
Thanks very much, Tariro, for hosting me, and it's really a great honor to be having this discussion with ActionAid.
It's a great honor to have you. You are actually a voice to reckon with, and we have seen you in the forefront of doing Stop the PVO bill, Stop the amendment bill number 2. Is that something that you're interested in? And if yes, why are you so keen about this law, and how can it be so bad or affecting young people and young women in Zimbabwe?
Okay, fantastic. So thanks very much. And I think you are right to say that I am a very pragmatic practitioner of the law, and I see it as something that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. And particularly in reference to Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2, which is now Constitutional Amendment Act number 2, because it actually came into effect. I think the drive around that is denoted from the fact that it was genuinely the proposal of amendments at a time when the country was going through a global health crisis alongside the rest of the world. We knew that people were on lockdown. If you see how the public interviews were held, a lot of people were excluded. And yet this is a constitution that came into being when more than 2 million people voted yes to that particular constitution in 2013. And some of the provisions, really, if you do your analysis, they are basically adding more power to the office of the president, the executive, and particularly the person of the president. There is the weakening of the judiciary through the removing of public interviews, through the extension of the age limit. All of these things are actually leading towards the strength in the executive arm of government for the president. And if you look at issues around the legislative assembly, how they would not be able to veto international treaties, you look at how youth were given 10 seats, how the 60-seat quota system for women was extended. These are not very beneficial provisions, and I think later on in the discussion I will divulge more around that. With reference to the PVO bill, I think fundamentally it is important to acknowledge that there is a significant amount of shrinking civic space. And all along, we watched step by step these fundamental freedoms and also the space shrinking through a piece of legislation, through a particular statutory instrument, sometimes through cohesive methods that encapsulated such things as violence, judicial persecutions, arrests. All of these were systemically building up towards the shrinking of civic space. And finally, we knew that NGOs remained untouched. Mm-hmm. And I've always said that the predecessor of the PVO bill has been the proposed patriotic bill, which never saw the light of day, which fundamentally was trying to ensure that people who are not in the traditional political party space and in the government do not have access to foreign governments, to international persons. But NGOs do have that. And they then came up with the PVO bill, which fundamentally had 3 principles. The first was the Financial Action Task Force. That one has been dropped. The second one was on regularizing the operations of NGOs, whatever that means. And then finally, and this is crucially the principle that I feel that these people were really after, was to stop NGOs from engaging in political lobbying activities. And this is all very much speculative. Mm-hmm. They call it terrorism, but it's very much speculative. So the crucial question around all of this is, you are bringing this law in a country where 80% of our health system fundamentally depends on the monies that are coming from INGOs and NGOs. You are bringing this law, in a country where a lot of the awareness around the Constitution, even NGOs have actually done more work to advance Section 7 of the Constitution. They're really helping out. And if we look at it from the perspective, as we move towards the 2023 election, and this particular bill becomes a law, whenever there has been political violence, whenever there has been human rights, violations, NGOs have been critical actors in terms of questioning and demanding accountability in terms of how the government actually treats its citizens. So we are realizing that the moment you start to attack NGOs, again, it is meant to stifle any opponent, any opposition voice, any dissident. And we cannot live, in a democracy where there is no attention that comes from questions related to accountability. And this is what fundamentally this bill will actually target. So it will affect people in terms of their first generation rights, their second generation rights, their third generation rights, that are enlisted in Chapter 4 of our Constitution, which is our Bill of Rights. And your first generation rights include such things as your political participation, the right to demonstrate peacefully, of course, and issue out a petition. All of those things are fundamentally disrupted. Your second generation rights, socio-economic rights, your rights to water, your rights to food. I mean, the World Health Organization has even stated that at some point in 2019 going 2020, over half of Zimbabweans needed to be on food aid. And it was NGOs that are responsible for distributing that food. So anything, particularly in this particular PVO bill, can be interpreted as extremely political, because when certain political parties campaign, what do? They give people food. And if NGOs are giving people food, they're distributing food, I think, the power connotation there is that they are taking away our power. So I think it is fundamental that we reflect on how, the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2, which became an act, it's now an act, has significantly affected how young women, young people, and generally Zimbabweans show up. And definitely there will be hardships associated to that particular arrangement. And now we have a golden opportunity, especially with the PVO bill. We can challenge it. We can make it very clear that this is just unacceptable as a country. So I think I'll stop there for now.
Okay. You mentioned a very important part of how this is very political, intentional rather. I want to understand, how has this been, or would it affect young people, young women in particular, all these bills? Is it the exclusion that you spoke about during the crisis and the pandemic? Were women part of that exclusion? Were women affected? And if they were affected, how were they affected?
All right, so thanks very much for the question. So I think if I was to begin to decipher, and I just wanted to come back to what you said on earlier, yes, I have been doing a lot of constitutionalism work and a lot of PVO related work, but I haven't been doing that alone. So there's been a team, our team at We Lead Trust has been an amazing team that has made all of this possible. And in the analysis that we have done, when we've looked at it, youth, women, they really have been affected, and they'll continue to be affected by the current arrangement of things. And I won't go into the tricklets, into the tentacles, all the diverse tentacles of how they'll be affected, but I will maybe zero down on a particular thing. So for instance, we knew that in Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2, which is now, like I said, an act, one of the provisions was that youth were to get a 10-seat quota system. And I think close up analyzing that, we realize that the quota system really has no benefit for young people. I think, as a major rhetoric, I always say this wherever I go, it's quite repetitive, that, the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2 came from the executive. It was an executive-inspired bill. And because it came from the executive, who is in the executive? It's men who are much older. There are no young people in the executive. And one might want to inquire, where did you get the number 10 for young people in terms of how they want to be represented? We fundamentally ask the questions around, why are they even interested? Is it an act of generosity that they are giving young people this 10 seats. And you realize that the worry is that it is now becoming more clear and more evident that youth are consistently being marginalized in positions of leadership, decision-making, and governance, and particularly within the political party space itself, but also within government, within the legislative, within, even our constitution. It has ageistic, constructions within itself. So we look at it from all of these perspectives, and you realize that these people know that young people are soon going to organize themselves to demand for space, because we have people that have been in government for the past 40 years, we have people that have been in government for the past 20 years, we have people that have been in parliament for the past 20 years or so, and we're realizing that we have not gotten the Zimbabwe that we want as young people, and they're just going to start dragging all of those people out if they begin to organize. So what you do is you give them a 10-seat quota system, and it's a very, very brilliant political strategy, but young people can actually see through it. So fundamentally, we must ask ourselves in terms of the cosmetic space that is now there. We run the risk that whenever you then demand space in political parties, you're told, wait for your 10 seats you get from there. We run the risk that within this quota system of 10 seats, there is no gender mechanism. So it could be all young men. There is no disability mechanism. They could exclude all persons of disability. We run the risk that there is no upper age cap for this quota system to say that once you are 36, you can no longer represent young people through a quota system. It is not elective, by the way. So it is the older people within the political parties who still choose these young people. And therefore, they will go and represent the interest of those people who chose them. Yet we are saying that young people are pledged with problems around unemployment. The economy is very tough. Young people are going through all of these difficult circumstances, and they are not, genuinely and truthfully represented in parliament, except for Honorable Joanna, who is still there, which leaves us with a representation of about 2.65%. So I will conclude with this. The women's quota in itself, it has excluded young women. And we analyze within, the first two terms that it was implemented since 2013, and now there's an extension. It was 60 seats. Who benefited? Who represented women, if they even represented women anyway, through those 60 seats? It was older, politically elite women. Some of those women did have political experience in terms of they had run for office as candidates, they'd actually won seats. But they ended up having 2 terms using the quota system. Some of them never even spoke in parliament. And we understand that there were no young women who actually represented through the women's quota. When it is now revised, it is brought again, we understood that they say, no, of the 60 seats, young women will only get 10 seats. And yet, in terms of the demographics, young women constitute the greater majority. Yeah. So I think a critical reflection on all of these is young people are systemically being elbowed, they're systemically being left on the peripherals, they're not being included in these processes. And whatever arrangement that has been made without actually including young people from the onset has gradually led to them being excluded all the more, which is highly unfortunate. So I think I'll end here for now.
You've spoken about a very important issue. For me, you touched on tokenism, you touched on age, you touched on actual representation. So my question would be, why do you think it's important for young people to show up, for young women to show up, and be politically involved without being given things on a silver platter? So in this case, without being given the quota system, without being given the tokenism to say, we're going to give you 2 seats in those of 10, or we're going to give you 10 seats in those of 60. Why do you think it's important for young women and young people to politically participate, especially as we go into elections 2023?
Fantastic. So I think there's a very, very common expression that says none but ourselves can actually liberate us. And I think it's about really understanding that the political terrain is about interests. When the older people were much younger, they were very much in favor of, youth interest. They've grown older, and now they are in favor of their own interest. And there is no way they're just going to hand down power. That's not how these things work. You have to go there and actually take it for yourself. You organize yourselves well, and you have to take it for yourself. So I think we need to fundamentally talk about how young people are not showing up, partially because of apathy. It's a reality, but also majorly because we have created a system that is meant to exclude young people. Why is this the case? Because all across Africa, Zimbabwe is included, young people have exploded. The numbers, speak for themselves. Africa is the youngest continent, but we have the oldest leaders. And I've always argued that when they tell you you're too young to lead, you're too young to run for office, you're too young to do this, you look at it from this perspective. Who told you that with age comes better leadership? And if that were true, Africa must be the greatest and most progressive continent in the world, because we have the oldest leaders. But we've seen that that's not the case. So there is no direct link between being young and being unable to lead. There is no direct link between being older and being a good leader, right? So it is fundamentally about developing human capital and developing leadership, particularly in young people, and also allowing for older people who have had their chance to exercise their ideas, to make an impact, whether they did not, that is their business, but to now create space for young people to begin to show up. Because we are aware of our current circumstances. We are aware of the hardships that we have experienced. We are aware of the poverty that we are living under. I mean, a person who was born like myself, I was born close to 2000, we've never seen a normal Zimbabwe, because that was when things just went haywire, right? But we can use our imagination to create a new Zimbabwe that speaks into us having all those rights within Chapter 4 of our Constitution. Some of them including the second generation rights, which are socioeconomic, having a job, having healthcare, having clean water. These are fundamental human rights that have been taken away from us. And what's worse, especially for our generation, is because we never saw anything normal. We've actually normalized these things. We've normalized bathing in buckets in urban areas. We've normalized shiborani in urban areas. We've normalized all of those things. But when you open a tap, clean water is just supposed to come out. And young people will have that opportunity if they have the power to decide, if they have the skill sets, the human capital, the training to be in government and decide. So the final thing that I will argue is that, particularly in reference to politicians that put in place ageistic normative frameworks, a crucial, and then they go around saying young people can't. A crucial reflection is, what is your legacy? When you have a country with 14 million Zimbabweans, you're telling me that in a parliament with 210 seats, you cannot identify at least 105 young people in a population of 14 million who are capable of leading. You're telling me that you cannot, find because there are not a lot of positions, eh? Yeah. You're failing to find. So what does that say about your education system? What does that say about your legacy? What have you put in these young people that gives you the audacity to say that they can't? It is very clear that you have not invested in the young. So, it's fundamental that we critically ask all of those things, because it is the nature of life. You come, you go, you're young, you grow old, you die. And you must leave something, and that actually becomes part of your legacy.
Wow, you touched on a lot of things, on human rights. You've touched on legacies that our current leadership will then leave for us if they will leave anything. But I want us to touch on a very important, I think this is something that's very close to your heart. You are running the organization We Lead, and we have seen you guys pushing the youth voter bus. And we want to know why it is important for young people to register to vote. What's the initiative all about, and how can young people jump into the initiative?
Fantastic. So we are running, yes, under We Lead Trust, what is known as the Youth Voter Bus. And basically the bus for us is an analogy. So like in a bus, there are sitting passengers, there are standing passengers. There are some in the driver's seat, there's some in the back seat. But all of these are different people heading somewhere. And that's the journey towards the 2023 election. Okay. So some young people will be in the driver's seat. Some will be standing as candidates. Some will be helping out, mobilizing. Some will be encouraging others to register to vote. These are all the different roles that young people will play in this journey towards the 2023 election. And fundamentally, we are organizing ourselves to assist young people to register to vote, disseminating information, making the process easy to understand, easy to access. We are doing a lot of this work to encourage more numbers of young people, and also particularly young women, to be in a position where they can participate actively in the electoral process. So what I just wanted to say is that it is important that young people participate in the electoral process, and particularly to register to vote and to actually vote on voting day, and also to run as candidates. It is very important that young people run as candidates. And why this is so important is that we cannot live in a country where we are acted upon. In politics, it's either you're an actor, or you are acted upon. And as long as we decide to not participate, those who do participate will decide for us. So a decision will eventually be made, but it will be made by those who were actually there and those who actually participated. So this is why it's so important. And we have seen that participation brings transformation rather than apathy. If you just sit and say, oh, we don't know how it's going to play out, we don't know how it's going to end out, you're basically in free fall. You're not in charge of your own destiny. But if you then begin to engage and interact with systems, institutions, to show up in public hearings, to register to vote, to actually vote, that also gives you a say. So I've always said this, that people will tell you that voting does not work. But imagine if 1 million people believe that in their heads and 1 million people do not vote, then it does not work. But if you say voting works and 10 million people believe that and they all show up to vote, you will see how it works. So crucially, it is really about small things done consistently and small things done collectively. That is how we make an impact. By you as one individual in your community deciding to show up and vote. And if 10,000 other people have the same mindset, if 1 million other people have the same mindset, if 10 million other people have the same mindset, then that's how you have your change. So don't worry about what the next person is thinking. Take it as a personal objective to actually show up on voting day and to actually do what you have to do. Because sometimes this is what decides our future, not only for the next 5 years, but forever, literally, because our country will always rip from the benefits of the legacies of those who were there prior. Then the final thing that I wanted to say is that beyond just the registering to vote, there's a lot of work that needs to be done around ensuring that space becomes very open and very friendly for youth to participate. Participate in campaigns around ID cards. Okay? Because some young people are failing to vote, to register to vote, because they do not have ID cards. And the one of the Chapter 12 commissions, I think it should be the Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, at some point it released a report that said about 2 million Zimbabweans do not have ID cards. They're stateless because they do not have identity documents. And when you don't have identity documents, you're basically stateless. You can't do anything. So we also need to push and drive efforts that this is our fundamental right. And we must have identification documents so that we can also register. And the process must be quick and easy. It must be very quick and easy because it's a fundamental right. Other campaigns that you can be a part of are campaigns around youth-friendly reforms, looking into questioning why things are the way they are. Why can't we have a particular law that stipulates that for a political party to be eligible to contest in an election, it must bring forth 50% of its candidates as young people? Why can't we, have youth-friendly reforms that disrupt ageistic normative frameworks? I mean, section, 178 to 179 of the Constitution says that for one to be a judge, you must be age 40 and above. Section 91 says for one to be president, you must be 40 and above. Section 120 states that for one to be a commissioner, you have to be 40 years and above. But the same constitution in section 20 will tell you that a young person is between the ages of 15 to 35. We are constitutionally and legally excluded from participating at that particular level. And we can ask questions because section 56 of our constitution then says there can be no discrimination on the basis of gender, on the basis of race, but also on the basis of age. So it is crucial that we bring these conversations and campaigns and we organize ourselves around this. And finally, to even campaign around the youth quota, to say, why does the youth quota only 10 seats? Why is it even there? Who told you we wanted it? Why is there no gender mechanism? Why is there no disability mechanism? Why is it arranged the way it is? And I think fundamentally questioning and organizing ourselves around these questions and following through with our pressure, because we have the numbers and that gives us power, is something so important as we move forward towards the 2023 elections.
You touched on I think for me, it's the idea of showing up, even if it's not worth it on the day. Going to the community meetings, going to the consultations, going to register to vote. But we know you also spoke of apathy that we have as young Zimbabwe. But regardless of the apathy that we have as Zimbabweans, young Zimbabweans, you're still saying, as young people, let's show up. So as we wrap up, I would really want to know, what advice can you give to a young person who has never registered to vote, who intends on going to register to vote and who intends on standing in as a candidate in 2023, remember what you explained about the voters' bus, that some people are standing, some people are seated, some people are mobilizing. It's really about us young people supporting other young people. But for someone who wants to be a candidate, someone who has never registered to vote, in closing, what would you tell them and what can they do for the nation of Zimbabwe coming 2023 and beyond, in terms of also accountability? How can we be accountable to our actions as young people?
All right, fantastic. A lot of questions. I hope I can be able to answer that simply. But what I can just say is, if you're not registered to vote, register to vote. And when you've registered to vote, go and vote. And if you want to run for office, hey, like Nike says, just do it. Mm-hmm. I think the crucial lessons you will learn as you go along. Have a network of people that actually support you, and know that once you actually start doing it attracts the right mindsets. It attracts the right people with the right resources to actually come and support you. And finally, we must be relentless about organizing ourselves. We must learn to organize as powerfully, as effectively, even with little resources, as what the youth in Zambia, for instance, did. And I think that's the sentiment with a lot of these much older governments. It's the sense that young people have the potential to do everywhere in Africa what actually happened in Zambia. So don't look down upon yourself, organize, connect with others, and just do it. Thank you.
Just do it. You had it for yourself. That was Namatai Kwekweza for you on the 263 Political Café. Until next time, please do follow her on her social medias. I think she's all around. She's Namatai Kwekweza. She's a brilliant mind, and she can just juggle what you can do. And we call it in Shona kuti, go and do it. You know how we call it kuti. She can push you to do things that you never think you would do as a young person.